Welcome to Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 59. Can you believe it? And today it's going to be future talk, also some Viking talk. You'll find out what the two things have to do with each other in a second. Welcome, everybody. This is a culture guy on Two Chaps, Many Cultures. And you will notice that there is only one chap right now. So the reason for that today, this is the first episode in 59 episodes. Brett and I have been doing this together. And Brett is tending to a family situation that I will not divulge in any more detail. However, rest assured, it is important enough for him to not be here today. So if you're so inclined, send him your blessings and your positive energy. Trust me, he needs all of that as much as he can get. So one episode with just one chap, but I'm not going to be the only talking head here today. We have a wonderful guest for you today. And I said Vikings and future stuff. The Viking stuff is pretty easy to explain. Welcome, Line Mørkbak. And what's the Viking thing about you, Line?
I guess I have Viking blood. I am originally from Denmark, and I actually have a dad who is a passionate Viking researcher and author as well. So I did grow up with quite a lot of Viking stories, and also being from Denmark, that is definitely something that we pride ourselves of as part of our heritage.
So what's the important piece that a idiot like me needs to know about the Vikings? Well, can you bust one of those Viking myths that some of us may have?
Well, it wasn't just about them being bloody and and being around the world, or not around the current world, around Europe, making a mess. They were also really avid traders, and had a very equal society where everyone could vote if they were not slaves, but if they were free Vikings, they could vote, and women actually had a right of a true right to get a divorce. And this is like year 1000. So there are some facts for you.
That is amazing, and that would explain maybe why those in today's world that are touched by Danish culture, whether it be parts of Sweden or Norway or parts of Germany or the Germanic or Dutch world and parts of the English world, as we know, the Danes had a strong influence on how Great Britain evolved in the Middle Ages. So some of that individualism and egalitarianism that we find today in these cultures may be a result of Viking influence. Would that be fair to say?
Definitely, or the other way around. Maybe it's something in the water, in the soil, that meant that's how the Viking society evolved. But yes, there's definitely a link to that. Whenever I do introduce, similar to yourself, I do a lot of work in the cultural field, or have historically done a lot of that. And when I do introduce people who are engaging with Danish business or living in the society for the first time, I do talk quite a bit about that Viking history, because I think it's important to understand where that's coming from. That driver for us to be fairly equal and solve it on an equal playing field definitely stems back from that area as well.
As you said, we both have roots in the cross-cultural world, and there's when we explain, or when I explain it to my clients, the difference between hierarchy and egalitarian societies, I often bring up an example, and now I'm having a hard time remembering which Roman source text I'm quoting from, but there's this story of some Roman centurion being sent into the Norseman territory to negotiate some kind of truce between the Roman army and the belligerent Norseman troops. And so the very hierarchical Roman society said, hey, go out there, find their captain, find their chief, find the top of the pyramid, talk to them and bring them my message, and then let's see what we can negotiate. And after a few days, the centurion comes back to report to his general that he has no result. And the general says, well, what? I sent you with a clear task. Talk to the highest ranking person there. Talk to their chief. And he said, well, they all said there were chiefs. I didn't know who to talk to. There was like every one of them was equally important, apparently. And I really couldn't figure out who was the more senior and most important person. So obviously this is maybe a little bit too pointed of a story, but I think it illustrates that these power dynamics go back thousands of years, right?
It does. It does. At the same time, also, Denmark is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, monarchy in Europe. So it doesn't mean that we haven't had that structure as well. It's more, it hasn't been like a commune. Like, it definitely has had that leadership. But I think it's also a matter of how that leadership is being navigated, enforced, and what invitation for shared leadership or on the next level down. That is probably what's really signifies also, like, today, a Danish management style. Like, there's Danish managers everywhere, there's CEOs of companies, so it's not that there's not that structure, it's more how that's played out, and how people on other parts of the organization is pulled in and having a voice and a true say in how to run business and how to make decisions.
Right. Now, you are not in Denmark right now, so you currently live in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and the Danes have had for, I would say, centuries, have this reputation of being a seafaring people and explorative people. So it's no wonder that you're not at home, so to say, with your fellow
Well, I think if you ask my parents, I did think they did think that I was going to stay at home and stay in Denmark. I have not for over half my life been just in Denmark staying put. I have lived in Denmark at different periods. One of my children is born there. We as a family have lived there at different times, and probably will continue bouncing back, as I definitely feel very Danish and I feel very European. But yes, right now we are living on the west coast of the U.S. in just outside of east of Portland, Oregon, where we're living on 11 acres in the Oregonian woods. So.
Are the woods still intact, or did you lose a little bit of the woods in the recent fires?
My woods are okay, but we have had huge forest fires here, and that's being still very much being dealt with, and some other people have lost their homes, and some people are still evacuated.
Oh, wow. Now, you said one thing that really ring the bell with me, and because I'm a fellow European, and you said you feel like a European. You not only feel Danish, you feel like a European. To those of our viewers who may not really understand what that means, and maybe there are different definitions of how you can feel European, I'm curious, how do you feel European? What does that mean to you?
I think that the more I've lived outside of my home country, outside of Denmark, that when as I'm, well, first of all, yes, I am from Denmark. I've lived a short period in Spain. I've lived in London. I lived in Edinburgh, Scotland. I lived part of my childhood in Greenland. And I've always traveled extensively, and then also lived in the US. The longer I've been away from my home country, I think I definitely identify as being Danish, but I think the nuances of how I feel different here in the US where I live now is not so much that I'm necessarily Danish, but more that I'm European. And by that, I think having a longer history than people in the US, and I'm also on the west coast of the US, right? It's a lot shorter history from the history that's embedded from the immigrants people here, right. Not the history that's here from the tribes that was inhabiting here for a long time. But it's a newer history from the white people here. So that kind of foundation is something that where I feel that I'm more European. I think how the political system is put together, I feel more European, and definitely also in an aesthetic sense, like a way of art and architecture, urban designs, things like that. I think I still have a European,
Yeah, and well, and
flavor.
I'm smiling because Danish design is known around the world for its forward thinkingness and architecture and design. There's, if you ever get a chance to watch documentaries on all these streaming networks on urban design, on architectural design, you'll most certainly come across a handful of Danish architects who are in the spotlight with their unique approach to creating the world in which we live, right?
Yeah.
Now, I would not suspect that you would speak on behalf of everybody in Denmark, but would you say that the Danish society today sees itself as part of a European puzzle and they're one piece in that bigger European picture? Or do Danes overall see themselves as we're Danish first and European second? How would you read the pulse there?
Oh, that's a big question. And actually, I think, without being too political, I think there's like kind of consensus with the major political parties, either if you're left or right in Denmark, that they would prefer not to sending a EU conversation to the polls again, because it actually is pretty split down the middle in Denmark, or at least it was at the most recent polls. So for those who maybe know, Denmark has been member of the EU since '72, so for a long time member, but have chosen at different pieces to not buy into the full package. We do not have the European currency. We still have the Danish currency. We've also not bought into the same or signed up for the same part of defense collaboration within the EU. So I think it's a tricky question for many Danes. I don't think Danes really truly spent. I think very few countries after what happened in the UK are really seeing themselves fully pulling out. That being an option.
Mm-hmm.
I think Danes feel that they want to stay in Europe and that they're feeling that we want to shape it from within. It's
Right.
not going away, but there's definitely some values around having, not getting, I mean, Denmark's a small country, 5.5 million people. So big constructs is not what we really believe in. Denmark has been Protestant like almost 5 minutes after Martin Luther put his thesis on that front door, and they're like, "Oh, we'll sign on to that." Like, we actually don't believe in sending our taxes to Pope to the
Mm-hmm.
Pope in Rome. We also don't believe that Mass should not be in our own language, or that there is a middleman between me and my God.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that middleman has always been an issue for Danes. So
Mm.
I think the Danish philosophy is to try and make the EU machine as democratic and as close to citizens as possible, and that's probably how we're going to try to navigate. We're also small, like we're not. We do need the EU. We need NATO. We're a small country.
So the immediacy is important for Danes, that not to have many layers of bureaucracy or red tape to fight through. I got it. Now you also said something that I found not amusing but interesting, because here in the United States, some people may not recognize this. You said depending on which side of the political spectrum you're in Denmark, whether you're left or right leaning, and some thinkers in the United States would like to paint Denmark as a country where there is only left and no right, or as I've heard it, it's Denmark is Bernie Sanders' socialist wet dream. So I'm obviously exaggerating here a little bit, but comparing worldviews between North America and Northern Europe, is that a fair assessment to say that all Danes are, compared to North Americans, are far more liberal and left-leaning? Or would you say this is just a figment of North American storytelling and there are in fact different polarities?
It's a good question, very good question. So several aspects of that. There is the whole political spectrum in Denmark. Of course, it's not a two-party system, so you got also a lot more parties where people can kind of show their beliefs and what they are believing in. People are not necessarily married to one party their whole lives either. Some people are, but there's a lot more movement around. So any government in Denmark, like similar to many European countries, is going to be a coalition government. So there you're going to have politics playing itself out a little bit differently. Denmark definitely have a long history with a strong labor movement and a very, very established social welfare state. We currently have a prime minister who is the head of the Social Democrat Party, but before that we had many years with a more conservative right-wing government, and have had that in many periods throughout history, and also recent history. So when you're right wing in Denmark, it doesn't mean you're going to go away with the welfare state. But it means you're going to turn down some of those, that you want to look at it differently. You want to give more power to that market to operate. Is it an utopia? Is also what I'm hearing you saying, and it's not. It's not. I think when you have had a there's a lot of things, and I'm raising my kids right now in the U.S. and their dad is American, so we're raising them with several religions and several cultural inputs and languages. And there's definitely things that's a compromise. There's things that I feel that the Danish system is doing better, that I would like to have my children experience, which is also why we occasionally go live in Denmark. Then there's also things that I feel there's a nerve and there's an energy that I feel is missing in the Danish system as well. So I think one of the side effects, unfortunately, when you've had a system with very little mismanagement, there's very little abuse of power in the Danish society and in the Danish state. So people trust in. There's a very high level of trust into what you're signing on to as a citizen. It also means that I think a lot of Danes have kind of signed some of that neighboring help and some of that community feeling to the system. Like that's taken care of out here.
Right.
And some of that nerve I feel very strongly as I'm in the northwest of the US. I feel that because people don't necessarily can rely on their government here, that they are coming together, they're involved in their schools, they're involved in their community, they're helping their neighbor out. Things are not running as smoothly, which in some ways bring the better of us out as human beings.
Because this is an immigrant nation where they were not able to rely on a well-established societal infrastructure, right? So they had to form a community that operates separate from any government institution, whereas in many European countries have well-established government institutions that citizens have grown to rely on and say, well, I don't need to necessarily have this bootstrapped grassroots neighborhood taking care of each other because my taxes are paying for it, right? Exactly. So I do think that there is part of that energy that I very much appreciate in this country that I'm currently living in. At the same time, you cannot just take a model that works in one society in terms of its size and social demographics and also long history and say, oh, we can just use that model over here. Like Denmark is a small country, Sweden is a much bigger country, but still these are small countries compared to, say, Brazil, compared to the US of America, right? Like Denmark and also Sweden and the other Scandinavian countries has a lot less social demographic diversity, a lot less cultural and religious diversity to be easier to build consensus, I guess, right?
Exactly, right?
Or maintain a long-standing consensus.
Yeah. And when you are having that view of consensus, that's beautiful, but it's definitely a lot easier to get consensus of people who are having the same, signing onto the same level of values. And when you're having the same upbringing and sharing some of the same cultural beliefs, that's easier. So it's a very different societal challenge that you have in other countries outside of Scandinavia. And I think that often gets missed in the kind of glorifying of the social welfare state.
Glad you helped us bust that myth a little bit. There's another Danish myth that I would like to address, and we talked about this yesterday. So just full disclosure, Line and I occasionally work together, and yesterday was one of those days, and I asked her this, and I thought this would be a good question for our talk here today. For years now, in the English-speaking world, there's all these new buzzwords brought into how we organize ourselves around work or outside of work, and this Danish concept of hygge has been, well, it's been carried around like a golden cow, like this is the new best thing and we all need to be hygge. And I am not so sure if everyone fully understands what that hygge thing means. You probably have seen this meme online. I hear you keep using that word. I'm not really sure you understand what it means. So from a Danish person, please explain what hygge is.
What is hygge? Really... Yeah, I think most Danes, when we start seeing that this became a thing and there's like a book in the airport of like, oh, read about Danish hygge, we're like, you're kidding, right? Like this is like people are now studying this. Like, but yes, it's a thing. I think it's something that Danes have always been proud of like, yeah, it's hygge, like it's a thing, but it's also an atmosphere, and it's also something we're using like as a phrase, like, oh, det var hyggeligt at møde dig. It was cozy to be hanging out and to have spend this time with you and to meet you. And I think there's been a lot of like along these lines with Scandinavian design of like, oh, it's a certain design trend, and that's BS. That's not what it's about. But it is actually more of an atmosphere, and I think what people maybe not always, I mean, it comes spontaneously, but in some ways it's also a little bit orchestrated. That it is hygge is when it's evening time, it's November, it's dark outside, we're obviously lighting lights. That Danes love to light their candle lights everywhere because it's dark a lot of time of the year in the winter times, and something is baking, there's something coming out of the oven, guests are coming over, and we're setting the table with matching napkins, and then they're coming, and oh, this is hygge. Like now we're together. So there's something
togetherness that I can come with my bunch of friends and bring maybe a 6-pack. Would that be okay?
No. So I think that's the thing, that this is not your like, I used to live in southern Spain for a short period of time. This is not the like someone's honking down the street, hey, come on, we're heading to the beach. Like that's fun and games, but that's not like hygge. There's something about it being, as I said, orchestrated. I don't want to say controlled, but it is the people that invite it. It's not like suddenly a bunch of people crashing the party that we didn't know. I mean, it doesn't mean that doesn't happen, right? But that overall sentiment around hygge is that there's a calmness, and it's also that we know what to expect, and we've chosen these people. I'm not uncomfortable. I'm comfortable because these are the people that I knew were coming. And as the hostess, like, my house is clean, and there's those matching napkins, as I mentioned, like, so I'm ready for this. So it's not someone crashing the party and putting the boots up.
And it's also not kumbaya and we're all holding hands and becoming friends all of a sudden with each other. It's by design, right? I invite people that I want to have hygge with. It's not like this is something that spontaneously happens amongst a group of people or even co-workers. So this whole work-life concept of hygge in the workplace might be a bit misleading then.
Well, I say Danes are very good at having hygge in the workplace. Like the amount of times you have coffee and cake at a Danish workplace will, I mean, with your whatever your diet is out the window, right? Like this is. So there's definitely also like Danes want this in their workplace as well, and they're creating that as well, right? Like, oh, in that cafeteria or in that break room, there's gonna be some candles lit, and now we're mingling there. Someone brought cake, and so there is that, and again, this is that atmosphere that was created. There's a lot around. I mean, most cultures has something around eating, right? But the Danes is definitely around.
Sweden? Is that similar to having fika in Sweden, where it's like it's cookies and coffee time, and then we don't talk about work, we just get together and socialize?
little bit, yeah. But part of the coffee and cake is that as we're having our meetings in Denmark, let's have coffee and cake as well, right? Like,
okay, got it.
yeah.
Well, since we're talking about work, work is changing, isn't it? I mean, not just because of COVID and Corona, we're not working the same way we did 5 or 10 years ago, and you're part of a group that is helping facilitate and orchestrate an event that's coming up, what, today?
We're kicking off tomorrow. Yes, yeah.
Let the people see what this is, right? So this is a Future of Work 24-hour global gathering. Explore our potential for disruption. That's tomorrow and Saturday, I guess, a little bit. So it's going to bleed over, and potential for disruption. So now I'm curious, what's going to be disrupted and what's the potential that lies in that?
Well, the format is something that's called open space, and people might know it as sometimes it's called on conference. So instead of going to a conference where all those keynotes are all set up and there's these workshop sessions you can go to, and you can look at the whole program ahead of time, and you're listening to the experts. An open space conversation or open space gathering or on conference is a space where you're having one overall theme, and our theme is around future of work and our potential to start shaking up the status quo. But that's really the headline. And then whoever comes into our space, so we're running for 24 hours. That doesn't mean you're going to be joining and being online for 24 hours. It means that there's going to be different circles that opens up every 4 hours. We have global facilitators who is holding that space. So when each circle opens up every 4 hours, everyone is invited in to pitch a topic that they want to talk about, pitch a session that they want to host. So maybe they're an expert about something and they want to share that, or maybe they have a big issue or that they want to hear other people solve together with them. Maybe they have a question that they want to post forward, and they're just putting that on the board, convening that topic and that conversation, and then whoever comes into that space at that time will then shape that conversation. So you're taking the experts out. The experts are part of it, but they're not on stage. There's no stage. It's a circle.
You know what this sounds like? Almost like a Germanic Nordic ting, right?
Ritual.
we come to the meeting place and I have a topic, and then the group decides, do we want to listen to that or not? So what if I pitch something and I get voted down, then I retreat in my corner and pout a little bit, or how does this work?
Well, it's not really a vote. It's like the board we have in the tool that we're using is a tool called 𝙾𝙬𝙤. We have many rooms open as we can. So there's not anyone's topic that's not worthy of being put on the space. So anyone can put their topic up, and you might have 20 people who come. You might have 100 people who come. You might have 3 people who come. One of the principles in open space is to believe that the right people will be there. So if that is the 3 right people to have that conversation right now, and that conversation is 15 minutes, then that's the space for that. If that is 3 people and the conversation is an hour and a half, then that is the space for those people at that time. Cool. And it's interesting that you're making the link to the Nordic, and I think that's true. There is something that appeals there. Actually, the link to the open space format is a lot of inspiration out of the village council out of African societies.
Right.
But I think there is something tribal about it. I think there is something before our way of structuring linear and also kind of putting weights over who has more to say and whose agenda items are more important than others. So it's kind of coming back to some of that way of gathering and having discussions.
Nice. So here it is again, Future of Work 24-hour global gathering. So if this is something that you're super curious about, what do people do, Line? How do you participate? Is there still time to participate?
Oh, definitely grab a ticket, and it's pay
You can
what you
do that
can.
right here.
There you are. Please go on our site there. Pay as you can. If you just want to explore it, like put a couple of bucks in, and then the space is open for you.
All right.
Come and go if you like. You don't have to pitch a topic. You can see what this is about if this is completely new for you. What we're hoping is that people are going to come at different times because it's global. So different hosts are going to host at different time zones. So different communities are going to step forth because it's more in their prime time zones than in others. So the idea is to really invite different thought communities in the future of work to be sharing. So this is where agile folks are going to be. This is where design thinkers. This is where people who are working with AI. This is where people who are looking at reinventing organizations from the end. The teal network folks are going to be there. So a lot of different thoughts communities are going to be mingling.
All right, I posted the registration link also in the comments wherever you're watching this, whether you're watching this on Facebook or on YouTube. It's in the comment box, or you can just write it down from the screen here. Now, there's one last thing that I do want to bring up here, and I'm gonna bring both of our video feeds in at the same height again. We're being at eye level again, so. This is a linguistic thing that I'm totally geeking out over. There are a few letters in global languages that are unique to a certain group of languages. So my last name, you see that here, the second letter of my last name has a letter that I believe is only present in 3 or 4 languages around the world. It's the 2 dots over the O, the umlaut. Lena's last name also has an interesting O letter with a diagonal slash through it, and I believe the sound that it creates is the same as my sound, right? So how would you pronounce your last name?
Mørkbak. So that letter is Ö, is like Ö.
Ö. That's exactly the same as my second letter in my last name. The O with the 2 dots is also Ö, which is really hard for English speakers to pronounce. So what do most Americans call you?
Well, I typically spell it just with an O because because there is no keyboard for that, right? So they call me Mørkbak, but then also I have a challenge with my first name, right? That is not Line, but it's more like Line or Lina. So I keep going back and forth if I should start using it differently, but this is the name I was given, so I'll work with it.
Have you done work in Minnesota or in Wisconsin?
I have.
Have they told you any Line and Ole jokes there? Okay.
Yes,
cool.
they have. But also often when I say my name is Lina, if people don't see the spelling of it, they will say, "Oh, my, Russian grandmother was Lina." So there's also some Russians and of roots of that name when it's spelled more like Lena.
So how many other languages have that O with a slash through it? Do you know? Or is it
I believe it's just Danish. I believe it's just Danish. So
Norwegian
in Denmark we
have it either?
Who?
No, the Norwegians, do they have it?
Yes, they do have it. I think now I'm sure. Well, don't let me get into the Norwegians and the Danes. I mean, like that. Their language is very linked to the Danish for historical reasons, and even though we're the smaller country,
we don't talk about this, do we?
We won't go into that.
I will have to have somebody from Norway. Actually, I'm working on a guest, and you might know him. He's not Norwegian, but he lives in Norway. He's of Italian origin, or his family is. He was raised in the UK, and he's married to a Norwegian lady. His name is Pellegrino Riccardi. He works in our space.
Okay, yeah.
And he probably he could shed some light on that. Maybe we should have you back on when I have Pellegrino, and so we can have this Norwegian, Danish, German, British, Italian, European
Let's
conversation.
get it all in there. Yes.
It should be fun. All right, folks. This was awesome. Lina, thank you very much for taking time in the morning for you. People, remember, this is where you get your registration for the 24-hour global event. Be there, show up. If you're interested in global work, working globally, this might be the space that you've been looking for. So get a ticket, be there. You don't have to be there for 24 hours. Well, you can if you want to. There is enough coffee in the world to do that. I need a refill, by the way. And just be there, learn from each other, and bring your whole self to it. Line, thank you so much for being on here. I hope to do this again soon. And let me see.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Since I'm the only one doing the technology here, let's see if I can do the outro right too. I think I almost handled the intro well. Let's see if I can do the outro.
You're doing very well as the single chap.
Thank you. Make me feel better. See you all tomorrow.